God, I love the energy, by the way. Let's keep that energy high. And so the plan is I'm going to ask some questions. We're going to go one by one. But, you know, the point of this panel is for people to feel, to think, to be energized. If you hear something that you want to just jump in and comment on, let's make this conversational. I think that would be great. And then we will leave some time for people at the end to ask questions. So just, you know, that's the plan. But let me just start with this, because the work that we're talking about is really about people, and it's about, you know, there's a heavy cost of being unhoused that we all know and we feel. We do this work, and it's hard work. It needs sustenance from each other and within ourselves. I do just want to ask to open up the panel and get everybody grounded. For you all, why do you do this work? If we could just do a lightning round on what does this mean to you and why do you do this, just to open up and have people get to know who you are. And we could go in any order. So Dominique, do you want to just go and then we'll go?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. I do this work because I truly, to my core, believe that housing is a human right, but also that it's healthcare. You know, at AFC, AIDS Foundation Chicago, I'll call it AFC, we say that people can't even focus on, you know, taking treatment, medication, prevention meds if they don't even know where they're going to put their head at night. And housing is like the #1 intervention we have to stop the HIV epidemic. So I think that housing truly is everything.
Well, this work for me is really advocating for accessory dwelling units, and Andrew will be our closing speaker and talk about his. But I became obsessed with them because I was biking on the Bloomingdale Trail and back in 2018, also known as the 606, and I saw what looked like a new construction coach house, and I was really confused because I thought we had banned those in 1957. And so I did a lot of research into it, and I found that actually this one was somehow allowed in the previous zoning code, and I was like, oh, I kind of love zoning. And so I just kept going down rabbit holes, and then I wrote a blog post about it, and that was 6 years and 2 months ago. And so we almost have re-legalized ADUs, and I'm hoping that we can have it done this year, and I can just like chill for a while. But yeah, so it's like legalness, zoning, that's what gets me fired up.
Good afternoon. I am here because of you. You're committed. This is the committed group that hung in there. I know it's been a long day, so give yourselves a hand.
Yeah.
Well, first and foremost, just, you know, I've been very fortunate in my career to work with wonderful people, and I don't mean just the professional side, but people who have learned to strengthen their ability to take care of themselves. Working in several fields with addiction and child welfare and the criminal justice system. People don't get better if they don't have a place to heal. They don't have a place to be safe. They don't have a place to live. And so it doesn't have to be a reason. I just care. And if not for no other reason, there by the grace of God, this could be any of us experiencing some of the challenges that are out there. And it's really important that we're here. So thanks for having me here today.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. The short version of my story is that I love Chicago and I love housing. The longer version is that for most of my childhood and young adult life, I lived in precarious housing, whether it was doubled up, whether it was being a teenager living alone, trying to make ends meet, or other issues that I had to address. So for me, it's an incredible honor to be in this role on behalf of a city that raised me. I hope that I can deliver all of the wildest dreams that you can have in 3 years, because it's a 3-year role. But you know, it is really, for me, a moment in which I can dream big with an administration that's willing to put housing first, and I'm happy to be doing this. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really inspirational, and I appreciate that. And so now let's get in, okay? Let's just dive in. Carolyn, I'm going to start with you. So maybe to just set the stage about tiny homes, how is this resource going to meet the needs of the unhoused, and why now?
Well, first is why not? I mean, I've been sitting here listening to these panels, and I'm thinking, what people who are experiencing homelessness want is exactly what I want. I mean, look at the crave we have for HGTV, and it's a place to be. And I think one of the things that we overlook is that we can't associate struggle always with poverty. And one of the things you've probably heard me say before is the one irritation I have just in the funding and the rules and the way that we do definitions, we've got to put a name on it to be able to determine how you get help and how that's paid for. And so the Chicago Continuum of Care, All Chicago, we are a partner with them. We try to, it's just a cadre of such dedicated professionals that I will just say, I applaud every day for just the work that has been completed just in the last couple of years. We have thought on our toes. We have been innovative. We're not doing things the same way because we can't. And so it's so important that we tie any type of resource that comes to us to be able to make it real for people who are asking, because none of us want to be in this position. And quite frankly, anybody who's struggling like this or facing homelessness, no one asked to even have to be in that situation. And it's so important that we don't challenge each other and say, it's your fault, it's your fault. Just like we add things to our own cadre of pieces, for me, if it's not good enough for me, it's not good enough for anyone else. I search based on what I want, and we all have choice. So just because we say they're members of lived experience, it automatically makes you think a certain way because you're categorizing them. I mean, look behind me. Which one is me? How hard is it to point out and categorize people and their experiences based on how they look and what they've been through? And so it's a little bit frustrating sometimes that we have funding and we have rules that just say, well, if you lived in this area, we could help you, or if you look like this. It is all the same to me. And just even what we've experienced, you saw that the point in time count came out, the need is clearly there, and I'm glad it's getting a little bit clearer and more defined. It's really important that our partners feel that any resource, we're all for it, all in support of it, because we need it.
No, thank you for that, Carolyn. Appreciate that. So, Stephen, I'm going to go to you next. So here's the question I have for you. So there's links and similarities between the advocacy around tiny homes and then ADUs or accessory dwelling units that I know you've been working on. Could you maybe talk to us about, like, how is it linked? How do you think about this? What are some of the actions you see kind of coming or needing to be coming in the near term?
Yeah, so I think they're connected, ADUs and tiny homes, because of a lot of the legalities. David on the panel, like 3 panels ago, had mentioned how they may have to tweak the zoning code to allow a cluster of tiny houses. So other communities across the country may call that a cottage cluster or a bungalow court, and they are currently not allowed in Chicago. And so ADUs are also not allowed in Chicago. So I think that what I and some of my fellow members in Urban Environmentalist Illinois have been advocating for is like reform of zoning rules to allow all of these historic and currently banned housing typologies. So another example is like, want to build a 3-flat in Chicago? Good luck finding a property that is currently zoned to allow that. Like, there are so many areas of Chicago that you are only allowed to build a detached 1-family house next to a 24-hour subway station. Like, that's the exact opposite location where such a thing should be required to build. And so part of that is like, we have to go and advocate to our lawmakers, our alderpersons. Thank you, Haddon, for coming here. And I want to link in a third thing, actually, is shelters. So a couple people brought up non-congregate shelters. That means, I believe it, correct me if I'm wrong, that's like 1 person per room, not a lot of people in the same room. And so earlier this year, there was a shelter that was not approved, which is not necessarily the same thing as being denied, because of a lack of membership on the Zoning Board of Appeals. And I thought that that was ridiculous. So it's like, wait, so because a couple people didn't show up that day, we failed to approve housing? And so the next month I went to zoning committee and I said, y'all need to change the rule on this. Or how about this? We exempt shelters from this dumb process. and actually Cut the Tape actually proposes doing that. So that's Mayor Johnson's initiative to streamline housing and development in Chicago. So I'm on board with that.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. No, that's great. And what you just said are very practical, very real life issues that we could take action on. And thank you for sharing that. Okay, so Sendy, I'm going to go to you next. And we obviously know there's no one size fits all answer for this very complex issue. So I have two parts to this question. I guess part one is, how does tiny homes fit into the affordable housing landscape? How do we advocate for them to be created here in Chicago is part one of the question. But then part two is about, how do we make sure that the tiny homes represent inclusive communities and that we don't have like a stigmatized, the residents shouldn't be stigmatized. So could you kind of address that or give us some thoughts around that?
Yes, I think we should all join Steve Vance so we can advocate for tiny homes at ADU. No, I mean, to be honest, I think having a mayor that really believes in movement to drive public policy and change is incredible. And I know that despite Bring Chicago Home not passing, it being on the ballot and having a mayor to back it up and being able to garner support for it, for whatever, everybody thought it was worth, but it was something that really had a lot of teeth built into the ballot. But nonetheless, it takes leadership to have to do that, and it takes co-creating with community to do it right. And so advocacy is really important, and there are many different ways to advocate for housing. In City Hall, you can work through the Department of Housing, you can work through the mayor's office, you can work on state legislation through our IGA office in Springfield. Ultimately, we are here to hear what you have to say, what you would like us to do differently, which I can kind of get into a little bit later, is the 5-year plan of engaging community and trying to re-envision what housing and affordable housing means for the city of Chicago. What I would say in terms of tiny homes in relation to equity or racial justice is that tiny homes is not exclusive to homelessness. It is, though, an option that we can build to support the gap in affordable housing, which the DePaul Institute housing studies, before the new arrivals arrived, so in 2018, stated that there was approximately 119,000 units needed to meet the need of affordable housing for people at 150% AMI levels or below. 150% is $116,000 or below their immediate income. So it can be any one of us, any one of our friends, any one of our family members that could take advantage of affordable housing, a tiny home. And so ensuring that it doesn't get stigmatized is really key, because this is really just building a housing stock and diversify it for any one of us. As Carolyn mentioned, it can be any one of us in need of transitioning into a different type of housing. So tiny homes is a great avenue, and I look forward to being part of this team that's pushing for these various forms of housing that would be accessible to the people who need it most. So despite it not being exclusively for homeless people or very low-income people, it is an option that the administration would like to pursue to increase the housing stock and the housing options for people that are at the lowest area median income.
Thank you for that. And, part of what you were just touching on is the community piece. And I will just say, Dominique, if I could look to you for this next kind of angle, is we talked through Bring Chicago Home didn't pass. We're heartbroken about that. The point in time data that shows that there's a growing need and that there's a big issue that we have to face. So given that, could you maybe just lay out the community angle to this? How do we create community buy-in? How do we get people energized? How do we kind of bring that path for how communities could get involved and really, in a way, like start demanding the kind of dignity that we want for all people? But talk about the community angle.
Sure, I'll do my best. So yeah, we have an interesting situation, right? On the one hand, our point-in-time count shows that what we all already know, right? We have a housing crisis and it's getting worse. And on the other hand, we had folks who are working for years on Bring Chicago Home. I know there's some OGs in here. I know I was having dreams about it towards the end of the election. It didn't pass. So there's clearly this disconnect here, right? And I think when we think about this, like, with Bring Chicago Home, we saw this maybe quite a division, I suppose. A rich v. working class, for sure. We also, let's be very clear, saw a very clear racial divide, right? We see new arrivals who are being shipped here from the southern border who deserve a home and a place to feel safe and to call theirs with dignity. We also have Black and brown folks who've lived in this city for generations, who have been asking for housing, who've been asking for resources, have experienced redlining, racial discrimination, segregation. They also deserve to have their needs met, to have a home, to have a place to call theirs, right? How do we, well, I shouldn't ask you a question to answer a question. That's rude. But I think what we need to do is start validating people's experiences, right? We need to build trust, right? To say that, yes, it's true that you need these resources. It's also true that these people need resources. And how do we make sure that people understand that homelessness impacts all of us? Whether it's what we've heard already today, right? We're all, one crisis away from experiencing homelessness ourselves. Or we see homelessness in every single neighborhood and ward in the city, every city in the country, right? So it really is an issue that impacts all of us, right? We have to build trust, listen as we validate people's lived experiences, and remind folks that while unfortunately we don't have endless resources, we do have the ability to work together to make sure that all of our needs are met instead of advocating for an us versus them kind of a scarcity mindset also. And I think that's why tiny homes are really awesome, because they're accessible, right? They're quite innovative, and we have opportunities to work for opportunities for all people to have housing through these methods.
Okay, all right, thank you. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have the panelists each answer this question, and then I really want the dialogue, so I am going to then turn it to you guys. So start thinking about the conversations you want to have. But we said that this kind of closing panel is about how do we take all of the beautiful concepts that have been talked about today and start veering into action space? How do we actually start making things happen? So what I'd love to hear from each of you, and again, we could go in any order, so no pressure, whoever wants to go first. But could you just talk about what are the changes that you want to see us take, like specific change that you think that we should be fighting for, specific actions you think that we should be really trying to focus our attention onto? Like, what should we be organizing for is what I'd love to hear from you all. And if you want to add any other pieces, feel free. But what should we be fighting for? What are the actions we should be taking so that people, when they walk out of here, really feel clear about the kinds of things we could be doing? In any order, please.
I think we should be fighting for housing abundance. Thank you for saying scarcity mindset. We don't need to do that. We can have an abundance mindset. I think ADUs are just like the base version of achieving housing abundance. The ADU pilot program, so the 3-year anniversary was last month. And so like 280 units have been permitted. And that's largely, I think, because of awareness, geographic restrictions, and they're not cheap. And so, I would encourage you all to come to the zoning committee meeting on June 25th and prepare a 2-minute verbal comment that you would like to give because you support ADUs, but also that doesn't end there because the city used to have a grant program to help expand or develop ADUs, and it failed. And a new version has not yet been created, although this Tuesday, the other day, some of the alderpersons committed to building an ordinance to do a second version, but it's not going to be ready for several months. The city has to identify another funding source, fix some of the policy issues, but show up on June 25th. You don't even have to say anything. You can just sit with me, because I and 10 other people will be saying something, but it's actually quite easy and then kind of invigorating to stand up there. 10 a.m. Do not bring a backpack unless it is clear and small, because otherwise you will not be allowed in. It's so easy to do it, actually, to just stand at a microphone and just speak your mind for just 2 minutes and say ADUs are great because of these 3 reasons I learned on the internet. And then the next thing from there, like, this is my little soapbox now, like legalizing 3 flats everywhere. Like, come on, it's a historic Chicago housing type that immigrants would build for themselves and their extended families, and then rent it out to a boarder or somebody else, and they would earn money, and they would help pay for the construction. Like, why can't we do it again?
That's great. Thank you. Appreciate that.
I'll go. So I think if we're going to say that housing's a human right, that means like everyone, right? One thing I'm particularly passionate about, and a piece of work that we do at AIDS Foundation Chicago, is work for advocating for housing for people, specifically folks who are formerly incarcerated. I have worked with a group called the Chicago 400. If you're not familiar with them, they are a fantastic group of Chicagoans fighting for housing justice and ending housing banishment laws, reducing registry footprints, et cetera. I think when we think about access to housing, we have to remember that, like, well, maybe this is a conversation about something else, but like, people shouldn't be judged for the worst thing they've ever done. And if we say that housing is a human right, that literally means housing is a right for every single human. And so I'm going to encourage you to talk to your legislators. I know it's session's over, but this bill will be probably ongoing for at least veto session, probably next session as well, to advocate for Senate Bill 2158 to reduce registry footprints and ensure that people who are formerly incarcerated and on registries have access to safe and stable housing.
Along the lines of what has been shared, I would say that we really need not only more housing options or housing choice, but also more opportunity areas. By opportunity areas, I mean kind of what happens in the north side of Chicago. We need resources to healthcare facilities, to grocery stores, to the local public transit system that exists throughout the city of Chicago. In that case, people can live where they would like and get the resources and the needs that serve them and their family members. We do, when I actually spent some time at the Department of Housing, where we were working on the ADU pilot, opportunity areas were areas that we were looking to have low-income housing in, because we had recognized through a racial equity impact assessment that in the most richest opportunity areas, there was not a lot of affordable housing. So as you can imagine, people who needed the most to have access to these resources were actually not living in these neighborhoods because of housing wasn't affordable. So at the Department of Housing, we did try to incentivize development in opportunity areas. But wouldn't it be great if every part of Chicago was an opportunity area? You wouldn't have to incentivize, but rather that's just what the city is like. So that, I would say there's a lot of work to be done, and there's, certainly, this administration is committed to doing a lot of the systemic harms that have occurred over the years. But it would take all of us. It's not, even the Office of Homelessness is an office that all of us are gonna have to be a part of, because it's an issue that is, it has existed long before any one of us. Don't know what the future has in store for all of us, but if there's another humanitarian crisis, or we need to find housing, we have to find a way that we can compassionately, kindly welcome people into a home.
Tough act to follow. I agree with all of the things that have been said, and I just want to add a few more things to it. A couple of things we can agree on is that we know we can't do this work alone. That just by the gathering today, we know that collaboration and coming together is how we do it. We've got to start inviting more of the community into that collaboration. We've got to do some more education on what this is and make it personal. If this was your sister, if this was your, several years ago, I had a state legislator when I was working in the field of addiction, and he said, Carolyn, I don't know why these people just don't stop using drugs. Why can't they just stop using drugs? He says, my brother smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day. He quit on his own. I said, well, thank God, bless his heart. Everybody can't do that. Everybody can't do that. So we have to learn how to work together and continue to come up with new ways of doing things. The second thing is, I think we have such great data. We've got the research out there. We just recently in the state of Illinois finished a great report with recommendations, and also, I will say, funding that's coming along to support the whole issue of Black homelessness. It's just so important, and the continuum of care, this is one of the things that we continually look at in Chicago. If you're not aware, 80% or more of the individuals who are seeking assistance are of African American descent. And so we can't continue to ignore that. Our youth, the way that youth are defined, they're young adults who are trying to figure out how to get their footing. And we've got to do more to support them and not say, well, you're 18 and you're too old, or we've got to close that gap a little bit. No, a whole lot. And I think finally, the most important thing is, I would be remiss not to say this. There are some people who have been doing this work a lot longer than I have been. I've met such wonderful people, and during the last couple of years, we had people who worked nonstop. And I even have staff who, it's really challenging to help somebody else get on their feet when you're struggling on your own. We have got to push our legislators to support our workforce. We have got to bring more resources in to pay a living wage. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know what a living wage is anymore. You know, and when I think about the things that people struggle with, there are so many things that we can work with. I think the key takeaway for you today, we've got to push the needle. We're not afraid to try. And every try that doesn't happen the first time, we have to stop defining as a failure and start looking at it as the next step towards the progress that we're making. And so I'm really proud of the work that we do in Chicago, and I hope our guests who come here to share their stories with us understand and just kind of see the just tremendous effort that is here in a collaborative fashion. And so really glad to see that.
Okay, I have a few things to say. First of all, you four are really damn smart. That's number one, okay? I'm like honored to be with these folks and your mind and your hearts. Thank you for all the things that you've shared. I will just say, Carolyn, for the last part that you just said about like, when you try something, if it doesn't go exactly, you know, I say this to my children, it's not about failing. Failing is first attempt in learning, right? That's really what you're doing is you learn, you try, you learn, you try, you iterate, and you keep going. So I really appreciate you saying that. Thank you. It's an important thing for us to kind of have that like abundance mindset and the innovative mindset to like be able to move forward. So thank you for that. Okay, so you heard from this amazing panel, you can't do anything by yourselves. So in that spirit, we're going to open up the dialogue because it's really important to kind of hear from you all what are things on your mind. And in that spirit of like, how do we drive to action? How do we drive to doing something from here? I'd love to engage with you all about what are questions on your mind, dialogues that you want to kind of spark. So let me just open it up. I think, there's somebody that has a question. Yeah, please.
Hi, my name is MJ, and I just want to ask, where is the meeting at 10 a.m.? When is it? The zone?
So Tuesday, June 25th,
Right,
10 a.m., City Hall, Council Chambers, second floor. You don't need a RSVP. Just get there by 10. If you want to speak, you have to fill out a witness slip and hand it to the person who is collecting them.
Right.
And
I'll
then
be
just-
there at 9:30. I'm always, even when you're on time, you're late.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I just graduated construction for concrete at Dawson Tech. I want to talk to you, by the way, because I'm formerly incarcerated, and right now I live in transitional housing. I live in a halfway house. I'm homeless because I can be put out at any day. So right now I'm so hungry to get housing. So I'm sold on this with Tim. I want to be a part of it. You know what I'm saying? I work with Wind Recovery. I'm with Wind Recovery right now, a nonprofit organization, and I want to help these women in need get homes because whenever you have that home, that's where your heart is. You know what I'm saying? That peace. You know what I'm saying? I want to help because it's a bigger picture. It's a community thing. It's a village. And Thomas Edison failed over 1,000 times making the light bulb. Do you know that? When you fail, you just keep pushing harder.
Yeah, thank you. That was awesome. Thank you.
I mean, that's the kind of energy that City Council needs to hear, actually.
Hi, I'm Megan Drilling. I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what Dominique was saying. Joe Perry, who was on the first panel, speaking about his lived experience, he taught me that the CHA has rules, if you are a CHA resident, that if you have a drug, if you're accused of a crime, you have to be kicked out of that unit, even though in our country we believe that you're innocent until proven guilty. And so just along with what you were saying with that Senate bill, we need to get rid of these barriers to housing. So I just wanted to, let you know that that's something that I believe our taxes pay for the CHA, and we're making families kick their kids out because they get accused of something they may not be guilty of. So I just wanted to share that. A second thing, I'm also a coordinator with the Illinois Poor People's Campaign. We have literature outside. In that literature outside, it's about poverty in Illinois, and I believe the living wage, it changes per state, is $23 an hour for Illinois.
Well, and can I just say one quick thing? Like, if you look at the data for the United States, if wages kept up with inflation, the minimum wage for the country should be like $27+, right? If it was keeping up, 27+. Okay. There was a question. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Jennifer Rosencrans, and my particular interest is survivors of domestic violence. And I haven't heard that population mentioned a lot today, but obviously people who are in need of safe housing. Are there specific efforts right now around advocacy for this cottage cluster bungalow court that you mentioned?
Not really. I mean, there's a pamphlet out there next to the table that she was describing that I put for our group, Urban Environmentalists Illinois, which talks about some of the other housing typologies that we want to legalize. But something else is a rental registry that there's actually an ordinance being worked on right now by one or more alderpersons in like a coalition of, I don't know, like 8 groups. And you mentioned a specific population of people who struggle to find safe housing. So rental registries are a great way to actually know where all the housing is. And I know AIDS Foundation of Chicago has housing navigators to help people find housing, and they kind of have their own database. But like, if all these organizations have their own database, it's a really inefficient way to help a bigger population of people. So it's called the Healthy Homes Ordinance. I don't know if you Googled it, I don't know if you'd find anything. I can hook you up with the people doing that, but I think that's another thing that has to be part of this conversation about safe housing, quality housing, affordable housing.
I think it's on the website of Metropolitan Tenants Organization. It might be a little dated, but NTO is behind the Healthy Homes effort.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Robert Castillo, longtime queer activist, member of the Mayor's Advisory Council on LGBTQ issues. Also experienced housing instability after I lost my husband. Long story. Well, first of all, Bring Chicago Home, there was also a very well-financed opposition that distorted the issue, to be honest with you. I was getting mailings from Springfield, Illinois, from some realtor, and I'm like, I'm in Logan Square, why should I get that? I'm interested in affordable housing, but I'm also interested in a more holistic approach to affordable housing. There's a housing development named for my late husband, and originally my plan was to have it be holistic it was supposed to be geared towards LGBTQ folks and allies, and I had hoped that Howard Brown would have a health clinic in there, maybe Gerber Hart would do a library. So I'm interested in not only affordable housing and that, I'm going to put quotes in affordable, but I'd like to see more holistic housing, maybe, a supermarket in the first floor. If you're in a food desert, if you're going to be in affordable housing, what good is it if you can't get groceries? So, I mean, I don't know if any of you are working on that or see any examples that maybe we could do. Maybe I'm not looking in the right places, but I'm not seeing a lot of that.
The Department of Housing has a website that is for affordable housing listings, although it's not as robust as a rental registry unit. But I will say that the low-income housing tax credits, which is the largest form of affordable housing development in the country, which Chicago is one of the 3 cities that receives funding, does look at and supports initiatives that have mixed-use housing and also has like retail down below. And so they're actually just yesterday, City Council looked at, and Alderman Haddon might know more, but the building that just opened up in Logan Square put forward a plan to open up a bookstore and a couple other retail stores there. And hopefully that moves forward so they can rebuild and add more resources in that building that's next to the Blue Line. So a lot of this, yeah, okay, there you go. Parsons, yeah. So, it's that kind of development that really allows for a robust set, like you said, holistic approach to resources. And ideally, it's development that has mixed housing, so it's not just they're extremely low income, which would be considered the 30% or below AMI, but it's also affordable. Affordable housing does not mean zero income. You typically need to have some sort of income source. So it's a really, sometimes people don't quite understand. Public housing is very different from affordable housing. And but at times people that have vouchers do live in affordable housing units, but sometimes having it where it's just market rate housing. Another effort is the Affordable Requirement Ordinance, the AROs, and AROs are scattered sites. It's, again, not as robust as trying to find something from a registry, but looking at the AROs across the city, you might see that they're built in areas that have holistic models and different ways that people can get all of their services in one place.
I know there are also a lot of housing advocacy organizations, including AIDS Foundation Chicago and our subsidiary organization, Center for Housing and Health, who advocate for more permanent supportive housing funding, right? So coupling affordable housing with the wraparound services that keep people stably housed. I will also say, and I should know a lot more about this than I will say right now, but the state is also working to implement an 1115 waiver, which is like expanding Medicaid to make sure that people who are on Medicaid also have access to like housing, reentry supports, food equity, things like this as well. So I think things are coming down the pipeline, and there are certainly groups who are working on advocacy around that.
Hi, everyone. Michael Herman of Chicago House. Sendy, thanks for bringing up the ARO, one of my favorite topics. 16 years ago, I was on the street closing down City Hall to get a set-aside ordinance in the city of Chicago. So woo-hoo-hoo, we have one, which is fantastic. But I'm afraid of what's happened with the ARO, which is aldermen are all about, I want those units in my ward. And there is no flexibility. There is an in lieu of fee, which everyone thinks, oh, that's just so the developers can get out of developing the units in the building. But an in lieu of fee is dollars that can go to an affordable housing provider to provide the gap in our public funding, either an IDA funding or other funding. And literally, I just identified a developer to bring that remaining gap to a project that we were approved for by IDA, 24 units of housing in East Garfield Park, but it was not in the same ward as the developer was developing, which is in Fulton Market, because that's where a lot of the developments are. And the alderman said no. And we lost those dollars to our project, and now I have to search around the city to find another partnership. So I'm often frustrated from an advocacy perspective that the alders in the city are so focused on their individual ward that sometimes they make it very difficult to align some of the resources that exist to be able to move building forward. We heard that tiny homes, any type of development is expensive, and layering funding is necessary to get to a close on a project. And I'm just dumbfounded that, and I'll put a little other comment, is sometimes it's the most promoters of affordable housing that are blocking these initiatives when we're talking about low income, 30% AMI and below. So I do have a concern that we have great tools in the city, but it's actually some of our own advocates that are blocking us from being able to use some of those tools to build. So that's a concern that I have about advocacy. I don't know if others have experienced that.
I will give a quick shout out to the state. They did incentivize development to give more credit to ARO units built in the building versus offsite. I do agree that the formula of AHOF, affordable housing, those fees do go towards programs. So when they don't build off-site and they don't pay, and when they pay fees, we can put them towards what you just mentioned, all these different services. when they don't pay fees, some of these programs then, are hindered by being able to get more funding. But then you get more affordable housing in areas that I just mentioned being like opportunity areas. So it's constantly, I think, one of those that you have to right size, right? You have to really understand the different components that both the city, the county, and the state play, and the federal government as to how we are incentivizing development of affordable housing. But I do, ARO is a great tool that the city does have. But I do agree, and I know that the Department of Housing Commissioner Castañeda was here earlier. Her team works really, really hard on all of that. And just really quickly, I wanted to touch on the domestic gender-based violence. There is also a lot of work around gender-based violence out of the mayor's office through the Gender-Based Violence Task Force, and also through the mayor's Office of Community Safety. And gender-based violence, particularly domestic violence, is an issue that we are looking at in terms of how can we support people that need to flee and get safe housing. But as you know, privacy is extremely important in these kinds of cases, so it might not be something that you would readily find for just solely people fleeing domestic violence, but it is something that we're working on.
I want to also answer that question. So another thing that the group that I'm part of, called Urban Environmentalists Illinois, is trying to do is diminish the role of politics and aldermanic privilege in the role of approving housing. And so just yesterday at City Council, one alderperson used his privilege to defer and publish another alderperson's, or two projects in that other alderperson's ward. One was for 62 units of housing with 20% on-site affordable, which was like fully compliant with ARO. And the other one was 20 units, 100% affordable housing. So now we have to wait one more month before those two projects can get approved and before those projects can get permits and start construction. And in construction or in development, time kills deals quite often. And so that kind of stuff is really petty, but also people lose homes because of that.
Thank you for that. These are fantastic questions. We have time for one more. So yes, please.
Okay, thank you. And thank you everyone so much. This has been incredibly helpful. As somebody who's co-founded nonprofits around housing, I think one of the biggest barriers is the bureaucracy and the confusion around information. So if there's somebody who has a good idea and wants to get into this, but can't spend 10 years getting skilled up and understanding all the highways and byways of how the city works, is there an easier access point? Is there like a quick start for just a community member that wants to build housing or wants to advocate? What's kind of the best way to bypass all of these intricacies?
You work for the city.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to answer this because I actually created a booklet for Department of Housing that you can go to their website and download, and it's called Home, and it is supposed to be a one-stop shop for residents. If you're a renter, if you're a homeowner or home buyer, or you're looking to rehab, or you need emergency housing, this little booklet will have all the programs under Department of Housing's purview and a couple that fall under different agencies. But this is exactly why we have an Office of Homelessness at the city, is to have a central office where residents can go and seek the assistance in one place of, whether they need something immediate, it might be something that DFSS might have to take care of, or they've been waiting for housing at CHA. We might be able to connect them to CHA if they're having a hard time getting through that. One of the goals, and maybe I can spend a little bit of time talking about the 5-year plan, but one of the goals is, and we'll be announcing some initial launches soon for the 5-year plan, but is to meet community where they're at of what is missing in terms of getting information to them of how they can access the current resources and tools that exist in the city of Chicago. This is going to be a moment for us to also provide some 101s, some connections with other departments. People often think Department of Housing does, they do development along with Department of Planning and Development for the zoning issues, but then you also have Chicago Department of Public Health that does low barrier housing for people that are in need of mental health services. Then you have a lot of other agencies that interface with the housing and homelessness space. So when we launched the 5-year plan, it is also a chance for us to socialize a lot of these programs and services that currently exist, and also try to design what is missing, what we can do differently in the next 5 years in the city of Chicago.
Just one more thing.
Oh, sorry.
And just in regards to the whole issue of homelessness, I mean, the Chicago Continuum of Care, part of what we do here at All Chicago is just providing the trainings and being able to just bring our community together to talk about these common issues. So you're always welcome to join there. Go on websites, get connected to some of the many partners. The issue you mentioned earlier about domestic violence, I mean, if there has been any area of growth in the last 3 to 4 years in funding and support, it's been in domestic violence, returning citizens, and of course, finally now youth. And so those are all issues that I would say you could connect with.
So to be quick about, upscaling your education, I would say spend a night reading the annual report from the Department of Housing, because it lists every single program they operate and every funding source they have control or influence of. And also find and rely on a good architect who has done a lot of permitted projects in Chicago and thus has navigated this bureaucracy already many times. So Tim Swanson on my right has done this like at a level most haven't, because he's trying to build something that is technically like not allowed. But he also was an architect at a firm before this. So like the architects are also they're really good connectors as well. And so if you see a project, like a development, you said you've co-founded housing developments, go through your Rolodex and pick one of the architects that had designed one of those houses and ask them how they would navigate a situation.
Yeah, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention the delegate agencies and partners like All Chicago. That is a key partner of the City of Chicago. Department of Housing has all of their delegate agencies on their website. So does the Department of Family and Support Services. And a lot of them are HUD certified housing counseling agencies, which means that they might also get some funding from the federal government, from HUD Region 5. So there are a lot of community partners, like wherever you turn, probably one organization that does economic development is probably helping them also secure housing or fix the credit or whatnot. So a lot of the work actually gets done by community at the moment. And the City of Chicago provides funding and hopefully adds capacity to those organizations that are on the ground.
Wow. Okay. So I just want to close by saying you all were specific. You were very clear. You gave people here a lot to think about. You also gave us something to think about. What do we do when we have the mayor's office and a transformational moment that we're in? There's so much possible, and you all really laid that out. I just want to say thank you, and please, let's give our panelists a round of applause.